Hey guys, it's Rick here from gamesbandit.com.au, pew pew, coming at you with a brand new video on Star Wars Shatterpoint, specifically talking about the early access of Ahsoka Tano and a bit of an update for the Australian consumers out there and what's going on in our region. I also want to ask you, the viewer, if you were in my shoes or if you're another store owner, how would you distribute early access of anything that you get in a very, very limited supply? Because essentially that's going to be the essence of this video. But before we get there, let's take it back a few steps. So, there was an informal announcement about Ahsoka Tano being an early access item. It was leaked by one of the Polish stores. The following day, Atomic Mass Games then made a bit of a formal approach to it, a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to say, look, we're going to have some stores, part of the Hobby Next program, that are going to have early access as part of that program. Now, Hobby Next does not cover Australia. There are no Australian stores that are registered with that program. There are a few across the world, not necessarily just the US, but Australia is not part of that program. Immediately, the distributor was contacted to ask for a bit of a comment. Will we be getting early access? What does that mean for us? How is that going to work logistically? We've already seen consumers in Australia say that they're willing to purchase it from overseas just to get early access, because that's generally what's going to happen. I put out a bit of a survey and we got about 100 responses, and 1/4 of you had actually answered that you were willing to buy the core set internationally in order to attain early access, which is a little bit of a smaller response than I thought it was going to be, given that during, the period where we had COVID and there were delays in Australia, it felt as though probably 1/3 to half of the market share within Australia went overseas to attain any Atomic Mass, product line that they could, because Australia was having significant delays getting about anything in at that time. So, in saying that, 1/4 is still a huge number of the market share to forfeit in the big scheme of things. The distributor would miss out on that, as well as the stores, which is not good for, the longevity of the game within the local region. So, from there, the distributor, Let's Play Games, wasn't aware of that program at the time, or wasn't, notified that this was going to be happening. They then were able to reach out to Atomic Mass Games directly, and got a response that, yes, we will be able to work out a deal where you are able to attain very, and I quote, very limited supply of this early access item, which is actually a really good job by LPG. No fault of theirs, being in the shoes that they are, and the fact that they were able to attain some is phenomenal. If anything, I hope that the surveys that we're putting together and we're feeding back to LPG, any of the logistic partners, etc., the publishers, that's going to be able to mean that we're able to attain more of those early access items. Because I think, again, looking at the longevity of our region, if 1/4 of people are actually willing to go internationally to order it, which again is their right to do so, it's going to leave a bit of a big hole here when you think about it in terms of being able to continue those product lines across any game. It doesn't matter what game it is. Games are more difficult to support when essentially the bare bones of it is being apportioned overseas. So I think it's a great response by LPG working on that relationship and being able to attain, even though it is a very limited supply, any is better than none, which I think is great. I still have my opinions that I think early access of anything is going to be troublesome long-term irregardless, because there's always essentially going to be an essence of favoritism, not necessarily by the publisher, not necessarily by the distributor, but by the store. And that's what I want to ask you as my viewers. What would you do in my shoes, right? If you're only able to attain 5 of Ahsoka Tano, but you believe you're going to sell 100 core sets, how would you distribute that in a way that doesn't annoy your other consumer base, right? Because that's essentially what may happen when you go about anything to do with exclusivity items. Even though we know it's not limited edition, we know Ahsoka Tano is going to be able to be purchased within 12 months of the official core set release, which at the moment is the 2nd of June. But I also know, and this is going to happen, it is essentially going to happen, that we are going to see Ahsoka Tano up for probably $100, $120, $140 on the secondary market. It's just going to happen. We've seen it before in Star Wars Legion. When the Hoth version of Luke Skywalker came out, there were stores who were able to attain limited supply of those, and they flogged them off at they themselves, without even going to the second market, for $150 to $200. Obviously, members of the community were really upset because it meant that they weren't able to get their hands on it at a reasonable price, and it takes away from the game essentially when you have anything that's exclusive like that, and people are taking advantage of the position that they're in. So that's always going to be an interesting one. Again, I know there are people going to be out there like, no, Ahsoka Tano won't be on the market for $100 to $150. That's just not going to happen. It will happen. I've got a magic crystal ball. In fact, this video will act as a time capsule where I'm either going to be completely wrong or I'm going to be on the money. It might not be exactly $100. It might be $80. It might even go up to $150. Who knows, right? It's going to be by supply and demand, and I think there's going to be extremely limited supply, but a very high demand of it. I can already tell you now that there have been 36 people that have reached out to me independently, not just through our social media channels or writing comments, specifically, going via email or text message, asking if they can, attain Ahsoka Tano from us directly. So I already know there's going to be a very high demand for the item without even having a formal allocation yet within Australia. Now, I could talk about the distribution of that early access from the distributor themselves, but I think it's kind of semantics. I think, we're all on the same chessboard. They're going to work out a system that they feel is best for, the longevity of the game. They're going to have to roll it out. There's not much we can do about that, but what we can do about it is discuss, what would you do if you're in the position where you're only able to attain a limited supply? Let's say that Games Bandit was only able to attain 5 copies. How would you distribute that? It's going to be very problematic, and you have to be extremely diplomatic about your approach on this, because where there's going to be one winner, or in this case 5 winners, there's probably going to be, if we look at a case study of 100 people, 95 people who miss out as a result. And it's going to suck for them, right? So how do you make it that, in the broad scheme of things, that it's fair and it's just, and that everyone feels as though they had an equal chance of getting it? If that's not the way you go about it, how are you going to go about it? There's many ways that you could go about this. I'd love to hear your theory on this. One would be supply it to only your highest of loyalist supporters, which again would be easily attainable. Every person who uses a merchant facility can see customer names, what they've purchased over the time, what the total value of those purchases are, how recent were they purchased. Would you essentially give them preference above anyone else? I think in most cases, that's a very good way to lean on about it. But in that way, is it fair and is it just that, random people of the community then don't actually have a chance of getting it if they're just buying the core set from you off the cuff because it's the first game that they're purchasing in the miniature world? So that brings a second alternative, is you do a random hat draw. Basically, you put everyone who's bought put everyone's name in a hat that's purchased the core set from you, and you draw it out. Obviously, you'd have to do that on probably a live stream or with a live audience to ensure authenticity of the actual drawing of the names. The only problem with that is, are the people who have supported you for 4 to 5 years going to be annoyed that, Tony, who only bought from you yesterday for the first time ever, got it and they didn't, right? They would have every right to be upset about it. Another alternative is launch parties. So Games Bandit, as well as the Central Coast Gaming Group, is collaborating to do a bit of a launch day the following day, where we're going to have exclusive prices on our product range to try and draw as much attention to that event as possible. Would we do a random hat draw for that? That is one possibility as well, where if you attend the event, we draw it out of a hat. Obviously, that would help with the publicity of the event. If you were to say, hey, look, we've got 2. Anyone that comes, your name gets in the hat, draw it out live, in front of everyone. That could be another way. Another way that I've seen, specific promotional cards go on in the card market is that, I forget the specific name of the system, but they do like a draw, kind of like an actual paid raffle where everyone purchases like $2 of a ticket and then they draw it out, irregardless if only 2 people buy tickets or if 50 people buy tickets. But then you've got the problem of people believing that you could be making too much money off something that should virtually be free, which is a completely another topic. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Is there a system that you would do? Put yourself in the shoes of a store owner. Think about all the long-term and the short-term impacts by your decision-making with something like this. It's definitely a double-edged sword. Again, not everyone in Australia is going to get it, irregardless of what store they go to. It's just not going to happen. So it's going to be really interesting how everyone goes about distributing it in the first place from their store with their customer base. The other alternative, again, first and best dress. But the problem with that is, if you've already got, 25 pre-orders, and you're only telling people 3 months later that you're putting Ahsoka Tano to your earliest purchases, does that then become a problem because you've already aligned with who gets it? I think there's going to be, interesting tacks with how each store goes about this. The other thing I'd really want to address as kind of the last point is, I don't believe this is going to be free. And I've said this in a video previously, is that no OP kit, promotional item, is ever free, right? The distributor has to buy it from the publisher. The store has to buy it from the distributor. They then have to recoup their costs back by tacking it on as an extra cost or as like an entry fee if it's an OP kit, right? If you do an organized play and it's like, we're playing for this OP kit as part of the prize pool. Now, with this specifically, I can't see a world where LPG was given Ahsoka Tano for free, so I don't see why they would then not add it as a cost to your store. It could happen. Don't get me wrong. It could happen. And there seems to be a lot of people who have this train of thought that, yes, Ahsoka Tano will be free with the core set when we purchase it. But let me put it to you this way. If Games Bandit is selling it for, say, $225 for a core set, and the retail price of the item is $295, but then another store is selling it for $260, the core set that is, but with Ahsoka Tano, are you really getting it for free? You know what I mean? So I think stores are going to have to price it within their core set as a bit of a bundle. Personally, I think that you can probably do a few different, you can probably distribute it via a few different channels. First of all, your most loyalist buyer, you could allocate, 20% of what your Ahsoka Tano's is. 30% can be given to, random raffles, live stream videos on Facebook of you plucking names out of a hat of anyone who's pre-ordered. And thirdly, having an initial, launch event where you then do 50% to kind of draw more attention to the event and make it bigger than what it is. Because I can tell you right now, if I was to tell people, we have Ahsoka Tano at this event, you come, you're able to, go in the draw, I guarantee the event would probably double. For sure. 100%. That's just how it's going to work. So it'll be interesting to see how that all falls out and what stores implement in order to ensure that they get it out without annoying their other loyal customer base. These things are always going to be tricky, but I'd love to hear your opinion. What would you do? All right? We've given you a few ideas. Would you go along with those ideas, or are there other ways that you would do it? Thanks so much for listening to the video. We'll post any updates as soon as we possibly can. It's good to be back, and I'll talk to you soon. Whoosh.